There's an old saying, in politics at least, that you're only copping flack when you're flying pretty close to the target. And I reckon that the Australians are getting pretty close to the Chinese target because we've started copping a bit of extra flack. Firstly, there was an extraordinary press conference by the Chinese embassy. It was delivered today. It basically denied any knowledge of any incursions or damage or genocide against the Uyghurs. We know that's nonsense. It was an exercise in propaganda. We also know that Australia's Chinese ambassador to Australia, Ambassador Cheng, came out with a thinly veiled threat. He basically said, you cannot criticise us without us being expected to retaliate for any provocation. Well, Ambassador, in case you're watching this, let me tell you that we haven't provoked you. We haven't militarised the South China Sea or taken it over. We haven't started trade wars. We haven't committed genocide. We haven't stolen the blueprints to your national security buildings. We haven't sent spies out here to influence public officials in our country. We haven't tried to rewrite history in your universities. We haven't been paying your university lecturers and professors to sell us their research and their secrets so that we can claim them as our own. I'd call all of that provocation. But one man in the federal parliament, a Tasmanian Liberal Senator Eric Abetz, he's been on top of this for a very, very long time. And so I spoke with him earlier today about exactly what China's up to and why we should be concerned. Senator Eric Abetz, thanks for joining me on the Bolt Report tonight. Now, there's been some very disturbing rhetoric coming out of the Chinese embassy, and they had a bit of a bizarro world press conference today. Tell me about that.
Look, a bizarre press conference, clearly indicative of the fact that the regime, the dictatorship, is in denial, and they think that whatever words they speak will somehow be believed by the rest of the world. They might get away with their propaganda, with their lies, with their distortions in their own community on the basis that there isn't a free press and the government controls everything. But I think the world will look on this press conference as another example of the ugly belligerence of this dictatorship, and that they are in complete denial, in complete cover-up, be it in relation to the origins of COVID or, in this case, in relation to the genocide that is occurring to the Uyghurs. The statistics are coming out from China itself indicating a massive birth rate decline amongst the Uyghurs, and yet they deny forced sterilisation, etc. So it is very clear what is happening, and they just think that mere words will overcome the objective evidence that is coming out now day after day, be it from the US Congress, the Canadian Parliament, the China Tribunal headed by Sir Geoffrey Nice QC from the UK. The list goes on and on each and every day. There's a new report. Indeed, the BBC did a very good investigative piece in relation to the trauma that the Uyghurs face, and they just think that these belligerent press conferences somehow will convince the world that all is sweetness and light.
The evidence is undeniable now. The Chinese propaganda arm can't deny that we've seen carriage loads and wagon loads of Uyghurs being shipped off to internment camps, the forced sterilisations, the organ harvesting, the lies that are coming out of communist China. As you quite rightly point out, it may work in the country itself, and it may work with their shills over here, the ones that have been selling our access for cash and the opportunities that it provides, but it's not working for the rest of the world. People are waking up that the Chinese regime is despotic, and it shouldn't be supported. It needs to be held to account, doesn't it?
It absolutely needs to be held to account, and that is why hopefully the freedom-loving countries of the world will get together and say enough is enough in relation to its trade boycotts, in relation to its military developments, and indeed even with the Olympic Games for 2022, there has to be a very strong stand taken by the freedom-loving countries of the world, because I would hate to see the history of 1936 repeat itself in 2022.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because I remember you and I had a discussion about this late last year, where you said Australia should boycott the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in China on the basis of human rights abuses. I didn't agree with you at the time, even though you had a very compelling and persuasive argument. But it seems that the rest of the world is coming around to Eric Abetz's position, because I've read today that the US is looking at allies for a coordinated boycott on the basis of human rights. What do you know about that?
Look, if Joe Biden and the State Department are starting to look at this, I think the rest of the world can understand how very serious the matter is in China, and freedom-loving countries have to take a stand on this. I understand that the sentiment is growing that we cannot give the privilege of an Olympics to such a despotic and, in fact, barbaric regime. And every country vies to host the Olympics, not because they love the Olympics, but because of the status it provides, the input of cash, tourism, puts them at the centre of world attention for the duration and in the lead up to the Olympics, and that is why Beijing wants it. You can't blame them for that. But that said, do we, as freedom-loving countries of the world, want to give that privilege to this barbaric dictatorship? And for me, the answer has always been no. And you would know very well my stand, because earlier on, when you were still a senator, you highlighted to me the position of the proposed extradition treaty with China that Turnbull and Bishop were proposing at the time. And you were no longer in the party room, Cory, but some of us, namely one of us, me, stood up in the party room and said there is no way I could countenance an extradition treaty with China, given that there is no equivalence between our legal system and their legal system. And thankfully, because of your initial input, we were able to scuttle that proposal. That was many years ago. Things since then have deteriorated substantially, and now the prospect for me of an Olympic Games in Beijing is completely unacceptable.
Well, Eric, I may have led on the extradition agreement, and you back me up. You've led on this cancellation of the 2020 or boycott of the 2022 Olympic Games, and I happen to be brought around to your point of view, quite frankly. The threats by the Chinese Communist Party officials today, what they're doing to Australia, demonstrates and indicates to me, unless we take a stand, and a very firm stand now, it will cause us pain, and I understand that, and it's going to be awful, but we're better off dealing with it now than being consumed by it later on. Eric Abetz, you are a true leader. We're happy to have you in the Parliament. Thank you for your time tonight on the Bolt Report. It's really appreciated.
Thanks a lot, Cory.